Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we're discussing cannabis regulation here in Thailand. I thought of making this video after reading a recent article from the Bangkok Post. It's bangkokpost.com. Article is titled, Anutin Calls for Patience as Debate Over Hemp Bill Drags On. Quoting directly, the problem of the increasing recreational use of cannabis continues while Thailand waits for the cannabis and hemp bill, an all-in-one legal mechanism to ensure better control of cannabis use in the country and limit it to medicinal purposes to be passed into law, he said. And they're quoting, I believe, Anutin in the earlier part of this article. Again, I urge folks who are watching this video, go ahead and read that article in detail, a lot going on in there. But to start off the analysis here, one thing I find interesting, the presupposition of the problem of increasing recreational use. Kun Anutin's been talking about this since he was on the campaign trail some years ago, and he never ruled out the possibility of recreational use. And, you know, I'm not saying I'm on one side or the other against it, but it's kind of been, it's like it's been moved to this track where it's a foregone conclusion that recreational usage is or should be or whatever illegal. Now, I don't know what the answer to that is, but what I do know is, you know, when this started getting going, the momentum was to turn this, it seemed as though the movement was to get this to become as much of a cash crop as it possibly could be. Now, I think reasonable people can totally disagree with respect to the extent to which, I got to be honest with you, I don't agree in any way, shape, or form with the notion that people are walking around outside just smoking cannabis or whatever, or using it, or, you know, I don't think that's probably the greatest thing in the world. In fact, far from it. Meanwhile, though, what people do in the privacy of their own homes, I personally like the present policy as it is, insofar as it's very, well, it's just very pro live and let live, if you will. And I'll get to some further analysis on that, comparing it to some other laws in a moment. But I just wanted to kind of note that as of now, it seems like it's like kind of being, especially in the media, it's kind of being posed as a foregone notion that recreational use should be illegal. And I don't know that Parliament has ever fully sussed that out. In fact, I thought that's what we were talking about here in all of this. And if so, you know, at the end of the day, alcohol has medicinal uses. But I don't think anybody's going out to bars for that purpose. Now, again, not an apples to apples necessarily comparison. And again, I don't know where I kind of like the way Seattle started with this whole thing years ago. You know, the dude abides, keep it inside. We did a video on that where it talked about, hey, you know, this has been decriminalized. This is now, technically speaking, legal, but it's not something that we really want out on the streets. And we're going to use nuisance laws similar to Thailand. We're going to do some things with respect to regulation, which I'll get into in a minute, in order to kind of curtail that, because, you know, at the end of the day, it's got to be a society you want to live in. And me, frankly, I don't want to be walking down the street or have somebody else walking down the street with their family and their children and things and seeing a bunch of people wandering around, you know, basically intoxicated on cannabis. I don't think that that's the society we necessarily want to live in. At the same time, you know, it's good to have the economic benefits. There's no doubt about that. And quite honestly, I think Thailand's economy has come roaring back because of the foresight and the farsightedness of these policies in seeing that, hey, there's a place in the market to be filled here. I mean, as we discussed in another video, 28 billion baht of GDP appeared in mere weeks after this initiative began. So, I mean, again, there are positives to this, and yes, there are negatives, which is the reason regulations are the best thing to do. Not recriminalization, regulation. Quoting further, when the latest notion on controlling the herb is published in the Royal Gazette, the sale of cannabis flowers or buds will become illegal except when they are sold by parties specially permitted to supply these materials for medicinal purposes, Mr. Anutin said on Wednesday. So, yeah, okay, there's a licensing mechanism for folks that are operating dispensaries. Again, I thought that was kind of a given from the beginning when this was being discussed from the get-go. You know, now, as to my thinking on it, I actually think Thailand has a pretty good template for how to deal with this to one degree or another. Again, not apples to apples necessarily, But, you know, as we've discussed in other videos on this channel, prostitution is something that, in my opinion, Thailand has dealt with in a very mature manner, which is basically prostitution is illegal. But under the statute, as we've discussed at length, there's a promiscuity element, which basically says, you know, it's transactional sex, which is the transaction being conducted in a quote unquote, and I'm paraphrasing, quote unquote, promiscuous manner. Basically, out in the open, being a nuisance, being a problem. Again, at the same time, being very mature about the fact that, look, what goes on behind closed doors among consenting adults, again, emphasis on consenting and adults, but what goes on behind closed doors amongst consenting adults, kind of their own business. It's not something Thai policymakers or law enforcement really want to get involved in. That's people's own business. That's good policy, in my opinion. That's good thinking. I think, frankly, Thailand has dealt with that issue quite well. I think it could be similarly done with respect to the issue of cannabis. And as noted further in that article, I'm not going to quote further. Again, I urge folks who are watching this video to watch that video, to read that article. But again, I think you know, one of the concerns is, you know, folks are having these kind of, you know, cafes and these venues where people are sitting around, again, not in public, it's behind closed doors, but it's right pretty close to being public, I'd say. And, you know, I can see where conservative Thais, especially older conservative Thais, might be worried that looks a little bit like, you know, I could see where they could say, hey, you know, how far away are we from an opium den to that? Again, kind of a slippery slope argument, maybe not the most grounded argument, but one that perhaps I can see the argument. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I can see it. I can also see where conservative folks, me included, they don't really love the idea of walking around their neighborhood and smelling this stuff, and you know, again, we've got to live in a society we want to live in. But me personally, I would rather live in a society where something this innocuous is not criminalized, so people aren't sitting in jail over it, and where people are kind of having a live and let live attitude about it, so long as folks are keeping it behind closed doors. I could live with that, frankly. You know, and looking at it again, medicinal versus recreational, I think that there's some kind of balance in there that policymakers can come to some kind of consensus on that will probably make everybody at least reasonably happy at the end of it, and would come to a reasonable conclusion about this. The reason I bring it up, and the reason I'm kind of concerned about this, was the result of another article I was just recently reading. This is from Bloomberg, Bloomberg.com. Article is titled, New York cannabis farms have $750 million of weed and nowhere to sell it. I want to read that headline again. New York cannabis farms have $750 million of weed and nowhere to sell it. Again, Bloomberg, Bloomberg.com. So let me just quote this real quick. Again, I urge those who are watching this video, go check out that article in detail. Quoting directly, by almost all metrics, New York's cannabis market rollout should be in the final innings. The state began handing out growing licenses to more than 200 farms last spring, and farmers have since sowed seeds, tended to rows of plants all summer, and just in the last few weeks finished harvesting. Now, hundreds of thousands of pounds of weed worth hundreds of millions of dollars is ready to be sold at dispensaries. There's one hitch. Instead of being shipped to retail stores, the weed is just piling up. Though a rampant gray market is already up and running, not one legal recreational dispensary has yet opened in New York, despite the state regulators' repeated assurances that cannabis stores would be a fixture by the end of this year. Now, to Thailand's credit, I think they did this better than New York to begin with. By rolling it out and just kind of getting the momentum going, I think it's a lot better than having all these folks out there that have now expended a bunch of money, time, and resources to this endeavor, only to say, oh, hey, you know, sorry, you're not gonna be able to ply your trade, basically, or we're just gonna keep the whole system constipated up and not let you ply your trade during that time period. I don't think that really helps anybody. What got me freaking out about this, frankly, when I read this article is, you know, and again, not an apples to apples comparison here, but it kind of reminded me of the old rice pledging scheme here in Thailand, which resulted in some serious economic, for lack of a better term, blowback, because it wasn't very well executed at the end of the day. And that again, I don't want to get political or into any of that. This is mostly me talking in a historical context. But yeah, it led to some problems. And again, if you look at it, it's just agricultural products. They're commodities at the end of the day. You know, if we're going to go ahead and do this, let's do it. Let's get some regulation in there and figure out how we're going to do it, the parameters under which we're going to deal with this, and let's set some good policy, because I think we're on a roll here with something here in Thailand. I think this is a boon for Thailand. I think it could very much help Thailand, but I certainly agree with a number of people out there who have their concerns, who say, you know, look, I don't want to live in a place where I'm wandering around getting a contact high off of everybody smoking around me. I don't want to live in that kind of world. I totally get that. But I think there's a good middle ground here between, you know, just kind of off the rails insanity on the topic and, you know, going back to what we were dealing with before, which frankly, I think everybody can kind of agree, it wasn't great policy. You know, it really wasn't the best way to deal with the overall matter. And so hopefully we'll see some good traction on this in the coming weeks and months.